You would hardly notice it if you drove by, but this warehouse near downtown Ottawa houses nothing less than the very machinery of Canada's democracy. Forms, manuals, ballots, all that is needed to record the political preferences of up to 19 million voters in 338 ridings. But the work here these days is different. The pandemic changes everything, and it forced Elections Canada to rethink the entire process of sending Canadians to the polls. Natasha Gauthier speaks for Elections Canada, and for more than a year, she and her colleagues have been focused on one thing:
to make sure that if there is an election, we are able to deliver an election that is as safe as possible for voters, for Election Canada's staff, for poll workers, because that's also a priority for us, and to make sure that we are able to do that in a way that the integrity of the election is not compromised in any way.
It starts with safety. Elections Canada has made a huge buy of PPE, and it's all here waiting to be shipped to hundreds of polling stations. 19 million surgical masks, gloves, hand sanitizer, 500,000 face shields, plexiglass barriers. And then there's the pencils. In a pandemic election, no pencil will be used twice. So Elections Canada has purchased lots of single-use pencils, 16 million of them. The pencil is vital because for all of our history, this is the way we've picked our politicians: a piece of paper, a pencil, and an X. And that's how people will vote in the next general election, even if it's held in a time of pandemic. There won't be any e-voting, no digital ballots, no using an iPhone to cast an X. It will be pencil and paper. But there may be a change to where and when you use that pencil and paper, because here at Elections Canada, they believe that as many as 5 million people will vote by mail if we have an election in a pandemic. And in 2019, in the last election, just 54,000 voted by mail. But now, this year, that could be 5 million.
How about an elbow? We'll give you an elbow.
We need only look to the provincial pandemic elections in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, Newfoundland and Labrador, and of course, to the U.S. presidential election to see how the pandemic changed the way voters pick their politicians, how politicians pick their voters, and how officials make sure it's all done fairly and accurately. Bob Dewar ran the winning NDP war room for the BC provincial election last fall.
We were extremely nervous because there's no playbook on this. There's no playbook on how you run a pandemic campaign.
Pollster Dimitri Pantazopoulos was inside the losing war room with the BC Liberals.
There are no big rallies. There's, it makes it very difficult to generate momentum.
The big difference, how each of those campaigns dealt with mail-in ballots.
When we identified people that were going to vote for us, to make sure that they were able to register to get a mail-in ballot. That was our first objective. The second objective, once they got the mail-in ballot, was to how to fill it out. A lot of people have never done this before.
The mail-out ballot is a little bit of a different species. First of all, encouraging people to actually get their ballot, and then secondly, focusing on how to get them to return it.
The NDP literally had to show its digital-first millennial supporters how to work an envelope.
A lot of people were not used to going and seeing that red box at the end of their street and putting a mail in there, and voila, it goes somewhere.
I've written in the name of who I want to vote for.
In a federal pandemic election, expect parties to spend a lot of time teaching supporters how to use the mail-in ballot. So this is the package that's coming in the mail.
So this is the package. This is what we call a special ballot kit. So each envelope will have a number.
And while asking for a mail-in ballot will be done online, everything else is all analog: paper, pencil, and the old-fashioned mail system. Voters will have to follow the instructions that come with the ballot or risk their ballot getting thrown out. Each ballot envelope will be opened by hand, one by one, no machines. And each will be counted by at least 2 poll workers. Again, no machines.
People should be prepared to expect delays in the results. And we may not know the final results of the election on election night.
While the act of voting and counting the votes is a paper-based human activity with almost no machines involved, it will be just the opposite for the act of campaigning. The smartphone will play a starring role in a pandemic election.
It really changes how you're able to find people and actually also get them out to vote.
Using technology to connect voters to politicians has been a growing trend for decades. It's a trend University of Guelph political scientist Tamara Small has been studying. She says more technology means voters will get an individualized experience. Algorithms will slice and dice demographic data, putting voters into smaller and smaller groups, and that changes the democratic process.
This idea of a one-on-one campaign, while I think it's seductive, I also think there's some real democratic issues that we have to sort of think through.
Voters may not even be aware of the pitches a campaign is making to other kinds of voters.
I actually don't know whether or not my Instagram ads are the same as my neighbor's Instagram ad, and probably they're not.
And in any event, an all-digital campaign may leave some voters behind.
It's easy to think that technology is it's evenly distributed to everybody. It's just not. And so therefore, some people are not going to have the same sort of campaign as other people might.
Political rallies, coffee shop arguments, doorstep discussions, all of that disappears in a pandemic election.
We did not allow volunteers into our campaign office. It was just paid staff, and we did no door-to-door canvassing. Two big things that we've never done before.
And that lack of social interaction with campaigners, with other voters, is likely to result in lower voter turnout.
It's interesting to have people come to your door. That's a good thing. That usually gets people out to vote. And we're going to lose a number of those things.
Low voter turnout, high voter turnout. Elections Canada is ready for all scenarios.
I'm very proud of the work that my colleagues have done.
And when the 44th general election is all over, all the millions of ballots cast, mail-in or otherwise, will come back here, back to the warehouse at Elections Canada, to be stored for 10 years. One final safeguard against challenges, a complete paper record of the pandemic election.